Of course, I'm John Vernon Corstein, Director Emeritus of the USS Monitor Center at the Mariners Museum. And, I wrote this book called The Monitor Boys, and I learned all about how these guys drank all the time. It was really kind of amazing. So we thought we'd do a program about them. There's just something about drinking and fighting that has some type of connection. On the morning of March 9th, 1862, the CSS Virginia was ready to destroy the rest of the wooden fleet in Hampton Roads. The day before, it had been very successful in destroying the Congress and Cumberland, as well as 2 transports, capturing a transport and damaging 2 armed tugs. This is a powerful vessel. It damaged also the Minnesota, the St. Lawrence, the Whitehall. But the tide went out, the darkness came, they went back to Sewell's Point, and in the morning at 6 o'clock, according to William Klein, who I later found out was not really a member of the crew, but he just told stories that he learned from the crew. He said that Catesby Roger Jones thought to give the men greater encouragement before they went into battle at about 6 a.m. on March 9th, 1862. And so we began the day with 2 jiggers of whiskey and a hearty breakfast of 2 boiled eggs. The crew now was truly ready for battle. Grog was really first introduced, or well documented to be introduced, in the 18th century. It is usually a mixture of rum, gin, or whiskey with water, sugar, lime, or lemon. It was a boost to sailors fighting the doldrums, suffering on long sea voyages, or to give them a surge of instant courage when preparing for battle. Enlisted men could only drink when their grog ration was served, or when they were in liberty. Also, there would be special times, and with like when they're loading coal, the captain of the ship would say, let's give them an extra ration because it was such hard work. Officers, however, drank without care and were only punished when their intoxication got in the way of performing their duties. The USS Monitor's paymaster, William Keeler, fought to do away with the grog ration, stating that drinking was the curse of the Navy. It was true. Many Civil War sailors and soldiers were all often too plagued by whiskey, and whiskey. Now, grog really begins, or we have it very well documented, based on an order given by Vice Admiral Edward Vernon. That's why I focused on my middle name, Vernon. And he was nicknamed Old Grog. And so he was a very successful commander in the West Indies. And so basically he will decide, well, he gets named Old Grog because of the that's Catesby Jones. I almost forgot. There's William Keeler, and there is Old Grog. And you can see his coat of brown cloth is almost like a very thin corduroy, and they called it Grogan, but they nicknamed Vernon Old Grog in honor of the simplistic jacket that he wore. It was less expensive than pure silk, but Vernon was also very well known for how well he took care of his crew and his officers, especially his crew. I have to tell you that the name Vernon comes, of course, Admiral Vernon has serving with him a man known as Lawrence Washington. And after the war at Jenkins' Ear, Lawrence Washington goes and founds Mount Vernon. So Mount Vernon is named for this man who also introduces grog. Maybe that's why Washington had a distillery on his property. Nevertheless, on August 21st, 1740, Admiral Vernon's order specified that the twice daily spirits ration would consist of a half pint, 2 gills, of rum mixed with 1 quart of hot water. And now that was the order to have that, but he also suggested that those sailors that had been saving their money and everything could also buy limes and lemons and sugar, that it should be mixed with that sugar and lime or lemons for a better taste. The rum was diluted with water in presence of the lieutenant of the watch. The purser would then mix the drink in a scuttled butt open tub reserved just for this purpose. The grog ration was given at noon and then again at the end of the day. And so the crew just railed to receive their allocation when they heard the call up spirits. Well, water actually was a huge problem on long sea voyages. Since the water is going to be stored in wooden casks, the water often became slimy or putrid, especially if stored improperly. It could result in fevers and diarrhea. So grog, rum or gin, covered the taste of bad water, making it more palatable. And the addition of lemon and limes in grog, as Vernon suggested, was actually successful in curing scurvy. No one knew about vitamin C back then. Nevertheless, they began to understand that if you had lime and lemons or lemon juice with the grog, that you didn't have occurrences of scurvy. And by 1795, the Royal Navy is going to issue an order that says you must have lime and lemons or sugar in your grog ration. So when water was mixed with sugar and then added to the liquor and the lime and lemons, it made it a healthy, tasty, and refreshing drink, but also, I guess, a little intoxicating. So both the Continental and U.S. Navy followed their British counterparts. The Americans used rye whiskey because it was more prevalent than rum or gin, and that became the more select type of alcohol that the U.S. Navy would use. Now, I do have to tell you that depending on where your ship was, if you were in the West Indies, of course, you would be issuing rum. If you, however, were in the Baltic, you probably had gin or perhaps even vodka. The Swedish Navy used vodka instead of gin, so it's whatever liquor source you have. But the Americans insisted on whiskey. I have to tell you that that at first the U.S. Navy limited the grog or the alcohol component to 1 gill, but rather than 2. That changed in the 1830s. However, the Navy still consumed alcohol in great amounts, as proven by the deliveries of the store ship USS Southampton during the Mexican War. Now, I got to tell you, in August 1847, Lieutenant John Lomer Worden, who happens to be the executive officer of the store ship USS Southampton, during the Mexican War, he'll actually serve down in the Gulf of Mexico and the Baja Peninsula, sorry. And I just want to, I have his logbook, and I just want to tell you some of the deliveries. In August of 1847, he delivered 431 gallons of whiskey to the USS Portsmouth, which had 200 officers and crew, and 955 gallons of whiskey to the USS Congress with 480 officers and crew. And the officers weren't drinking that grog, just to let you know. This operation took 2 days, as other provisions and supplies were also delivered to both warships. The Southampton continued to supply whiskey everywhere it went to the entire Pacific Squadron, serving in the Gulf of California. I've got to tell you, at one time, now the Congress got, remember, 955 gallons in August. In October, it received another 431 gallons of whiskey. And similarly with the other vessels in the Pacific Squadron, they would receive the same rations of whiskey. And this is rye whiskey, I want to let you know, which was the preferred drink back in the 19th century. Now, I have to tell you, there are some people who did not like the whole idea of people drinking on board a ship. And some of the abstaining crew members could actually receive pay if they refused their grog ration. They were smarter, like George Gear, who said, I'll make more money if I sell my grog ration to some of those people who just want to drink more. And we have a couple examples of that on the Monitor. George Gear was a fireman on the Monitor. This man, of course, is Andrew Hull Foote. And when he is executive officer of the Cumberland during the 1843 to 1845 Mediterranean cruise, he will establish the Naval Temperance Society. He is a very religious individual. And this was an important step towards the limiting and ending of spirits on naval ships, which was finally going to be instituted on September 1st, 1862. In other words, you could have your ration on the 31st of August, no more ration on the 1st of September in 1862. Now, every ship, and this is, of course, the Cumberland, every ship, we're going to have somebody who is extremely temperate. And on the Monitor, of course, you all know about the Monitor, 171 feet in length, ironclad built in 3 parts, the ironclad with 2 11-inch Dahlgrens, the ironclad that stopped the CSS from Virginia from destroying the rest of the Union fleet in Hampton Roads on March 9th, 1862. I have to tell you that that was the little ship that saved the nation. And he is acting assistant paymaster of the Monitor. That was a very choice position to have. It was a clerical position, but it also meant you were managing the accounts, provisions, supplies, and payroll. He was supposed to, Keeler, and he did, because of his business background, express a great mathematical and writing skills. And so we know a lot about the Monitor because he wrote home to his wife every day, and he's telling them stories about what he sees on the ship. Now, Keeler joins the Navy at age 40 because he considered slavery a hideous deformity and believed the rebellious Southerners were traitorous and wretched soul. He also found the excessive drinking of alcohol a dangerous habit. And he does not drink. And so during a dinner before the Monitor left New York, Keeler realized that the wardroom servant, Lawrence Murray, was drunk. Keeler wrote his wife, Anna, that Murray had been tasting the brandy and champagne before putting it on the table. He continued, noting that the dinner was a failure because the fish was brought in before we had finished the soup, and champagne glasses were furnished us to drink our brandy from vice versa. Murray was placed in chains and placed their brig on the Monitor. Was in the anchor well, so just figure being in there, and moaning and crying. And as soon as he got out, he says he's glad he's sober. But when the next grog ration came around, Murray not only got his own ration, but he also would buy rations, and then he'd also drink the officers' brandy and wine and whiskey. It's pretty amazing about Murray, how he had just a bad reputation as a drinker. We'll learn more about Murray as we go forward. While serving on the Monitor during an expedition up the Appomattox River in late June 1862, and Keeler is going to complain to his wife that the move up river was a failure because of two factors. First, poor planning for the expedition. Various ships, including the Maratanza, Southfield, Jacob Bell, and several others, such as the submarine Alligator, were part of the operation and did not achieve its goals whatsoever. And they just didn't they kept running aground and everything. When they ran aground, they just couldn't attain their mission. It was a bad plan no matter what. As soon as this happened, the officers all assembled on the Port Royal. And that led to the second cause of the failure manifested itself, as Keeler said, whiskey. They all got in the wardroom and started to drink until every sharpshooter shot fired was like a 32-pounder, and the reports were multiplied indefinitely. Under these circumstances, the expedition was given up, according to Keeler, and they returned on board their respective vessels with fearful stories of narrow escapes from the myriads of sharpshooters and with a bad head. Well, the Monitor is going to have one of my favorite drunks in the U.S. Navy, or let's say, not temperate man. And his name, of course, is our drunken captain, who is known as Commander Thomas Stevens Jr. Now, he was on the Maratanza. Keeler noted that Stevens has the appearance of a quite modest man. So far, I like him, but I find that first impressions are not always to be trusted. He has a reputation of taking a glass too much occasionally, the curse of the Navy. Keeler actually remembered Stevens because he was commander of the Maratanza during the trip up the Appomattox. He's the guy that brought the whiskey to the meeting. And Stevens often drank without care. In fact, more than once, he would be at dinner at the war room. And, there were bottles of brandy and whiskey. And he looked at Keeler and said, "I know you're an abstemious man, but I am not. So please pass me the whiskey." Stevens was going to be replaced as a member or as commander of the Monitor on September 15th by Commander John Pine Bankett due to a drinking incident a few days before. Now, Thomas Turner, Captain Thomas Turner, later and believe it or not, Stevens is going to become a rear admiral as well. But Thomas Turner, who was commander of the USS New Ironsides, the biggest Union ironclad created during the war. And so Thomas Turner will bring, and I just want to give you a secret about Thomas Turner. He's a member of that Naval Temperance Society. He is a temperate man, as one would say. So he brings some dignitaries on board the Monitor and go down to the wardroom to meet with Stevens. Now, I got to tell you, as they come in the wardroom, Stevens, now, George Gear said, well, he saw Stevens drinking in the morning, but, it was not affecting him in any way. And he thought he was fine to perform his duties. Now, notice that was in the morning. So, Stevens is probably drinking all day. And so as soon as Turner comes into the wardroom, Stevens, as a gentleman, is going to stand up. And as soon as he stood up, he fell down on the floor, too drunk to get up. Oh my gosh. He is, of course, going to be replaced because Thomas Turner turns him in. And so our Captain Groggy is not going to be but so successful on his duty on the Monitor. I mean, some people just were too, the term groggy comes from having too much to drink and or too much grog to drink. Now, the spirit ration and also liberties are going to cause a lot of incidents that impacted the lives and careers of the Monitor boys, as the crew like to call themselves. Lawrence Murray, we already met him before, the wardroom steward. talked about earlier, of course, was generally drunk as often as he could be. Now, he went ashore one day in September and got roaring drunk. In fact, so drunk that when he came back on board, he grabbed an axe because he's the steward, the assistant steward, Daniel Moore, an African American, will be chased around the deck of the Monitor by Murray drunk with an axe or hatchet, as they say, trying to chop old Daniel Moore. Of course, they don't like that. They grab him and they put him in chains. And you know, he knows where he's going. He's going into the anchor well. So he struggles and gets free and then jumps overboard. And as you can well imagine, he disappears forevermore. Although they do find his body, he becomes crab food. I won't go into that. But the bottom line is Fireman George Gear noted that no one would lament his loss, as all Lawrence Murray did was drink and gamble his time and money away without sending support to his wife and child in California. You know, when the Monitor, there's George Gear, of course. Oops, I'm going to get to him in a moment. When the Monitor went to a refit in the Washington Navy Yard, I have to tell you that you know, everyone got liberty and opportunities to either go home, visit relatives, or just to go to places like Philadelphia and New York. However, I got to tell you, from this liberty, many people deserted. Now, some just slipped away. You can imagine serving on the Monitor in the summer in the James River left an unpleasant feeling about that ship. And so as a result of it, they are just going to think, well, they're there too. James Riley is one of them that just disappears. So, you know, many naval enlisted men would ship on board a vessel and they would use an alias because they figured that if they didn't like the captain, didn't like the ship, didn't like this and that they could desert and then just pick up another name and either join the Navy or be a merchantman and say, well, look, I'm not this person, I'm this person. And we have an incident of that we're going to get to. So many, however, did not return because of drinking incidents. Let me tell you, Seaman Hans Anderson was about to return to Washington, D.C. from New York City when he, quotes, fell in with some men and went to a rum hole and took a glass of beer, which was evidently drugged. He soon found himself shanghaied on an unknown bark basically that sailed to London. When he got to London, he went to the U.S. consulate and actually said, look, I was shanghaied. I'd like to go back to the Navy. They allowed him to rejoin the Navy. And they said, you know, this was unfortunate. He just lost his pay for the time he was out, but the desertion was taken away from his record. My favorite story is about this man, yours truly, Wilhelm Durst. Actually, he's from Austria. He is a Jew who is going to serve on the Monitor. He had immigrated to the United States in the 1850s. His given name is Wilhelm. He also calls himself William to try and anglicize himself. However, on the Monitor's rolls, it says Wilhelm Durst, and he was a coal heaver, which is not a fun job to have, in my opinion. So anyway, what's going to happen is William Durst is going to be given 2 weeks liberty. And he first spent his leave in Philadelphia, then went up to New York City where he became ill. He claimed his illness to be typhoid fever. But later in his pension records, it will say he was sick from some trouble to my heart and stomach, contracted from the bad air on the Monitor. Think about the summer, you can think about the bad air. Stagnant, mosquitoes. Actually, living on the Monitor was horrific. So anyway, so actually got better. You know, he didn't know what to do because he knew he'd be late and considered a deserter. So he just decided not to rejoin the Navy or go back to the Monitor. And so when you don't know what to do, what do you do if you're Wilhelm Durst? Well, you go out drinking. And and basically he went out to a rum hole. That's what these guys call these places where they went to drink. And basically he would later say, I was taken in charge of by a runner, and the next thing I knew, I was drunk without a memory, and then I was on board the USS North Carolina. I asked for an explanation and was informed I had been shipped under the name of Walter David, and that there was nothing for him to do. Now, why did they ship him under Walter David? Durst had a tattoo on his forearm with the initials WD. Wilhelm Durst becomes Walter David. He was signed up for a 1-year enlistment, and then he will ship on board another Monitor, which is known as the USS Catskill. And many people ship on this Passaic class vessel, and many of his fellow Monitor boys, like Hans Andersen, who we mentioned before, saw Durst, and he later recounts, I knew him as soon as I saw him and called him Durst. Anderson added, he laughed and said that was his name once while on the little Monitor, but now they call me Walter David. I called him Durst. He was sometimes called the Dusky Jew. I'll tell you, with Durst, the charge of desertion for the Monitor was dropped, and they noted Durst was of foreign birth and unaccustomed to the ways of his adopted country, and he was, in fact, served in the Navy during almost the entire period of the Civil War. Durst would always be proud of his service, but he never stopped drinking. And I got to tell you, he was a drinker. And so as he got older and drank more, he began to expand his role on the Monitor. He is one of 13 people who claim to be there in the pilot house. Now, remember, he's a coal heaver, so he should be down in the engine room, but he's there in the pilot house when Worden was injured and grievously wounded, and that it was Durst that caught him and took him to his bunk. Well, he didn't do that. Then he doesn't get enough, and he starts talking about the sinking of the Monitor. We just know that he is not on the Monitor when the Monitor sank on December 31st, 1862. He's actually already on the Catskill. And yet he tells the most fabulous stories of the sinking of the Monitor. And with each time he tells it, he embellishes it even more. As I like to say, he'd be at a bar and people would encourage him to tell more about the little ship that saved the nation. And with a little fluid energy, he would be able to do so. And the greatest quote he gave during that time, he said, well, everyone said, oh, you're such a great hero, we'll buy you drinks. And Durst says, thanks. And he said, oh, you were great fighting in that battle. And his quote is, fighting in the battle was nothing because we were behind 8 inches of armor. It was surviving the ship at sea that made us heroes. Well, I got to tell you that this is a great story. So I got to tell you, August 31st, 1862 was a bad day for some. As the temperance movement gained strength, the U.S. Navy ordered the last grog ration to be served on August 31st, 1862. Commander Stevens, who was well known as an intemperate man, according to Keeler, I'm going to get to this guy in just a moment, had run afoul of Congress's new act, which ended the twice daily ration. The act stated no liquor would be aboard a U.S. Navy vessel except for medicinal purposes. Stevens, a heavy drinker, did not meet the medical requirement for receiving grog or any type of whiskey, and yet he said he was ill. And so he always had the whiskey, except he drank too much of the whiskey. So, the bottom line is officers are kind of considered different than the actually crew members. Grog rations were also on merchant ships. And if you had a merchant ship and you had a crew that was temperate, that would sign papers saying, I shall not drink while I'm on board the ship, insurance companies would give the ship owner a lesser rate of the cost of insurance because of that. Well, I got to tell you, as we know, fireman George Gear did not drink. And of course, always would sell his grog ration. He actually sold it to some for 3 cents, right? A ration. So you can just see how badly some of these people wanted to drink. Now, he did not like, no one liked this commander of the Monitor. This is Lieutenant William Jeffers. And I got to tell you, Jeffers is of high attainment in the understanding of ordnance. However, he was a tyrant on board and expected everything to be according to regulations. And in fact, he'd inspect the crew every Sunday, and some of them he'd look at and says, "You're a dirty hog. I'll have you cleaned." And some he would look at and they were disheveled or what have you. And this is in the summer of 1862. And so the greatest thing he could do was dock the man his grog rations for 3 days. And that was a favorite punishment from Jeffers to the crew of the Monitor. Actually, the crew of the Monitor actually wrote a letter to Vernon because they hated this man so much and said, our lives have been bad since you've been gone, and we would love for you to come back. Signed, sincerely, the Monitor Boys. And so Vernon never resumes command of the Monitor, but does take command of the USS Monitor. Now, I have to tell you, Jeffers, he wrote, let me just tell you, Gear wrote his wife with disdain about Jeffers. And this is what he writes. He is going to do something he thinks is smart. The new law about liquor says no, and he capitalized that, no liquor shall be brought on any government vessel after the 1st of September, but says nothing about what is on hand at the time. So our captain has sent for 3 40-gallon barrels to have on hand. That is enough to last us a year. I hope the government will catch him at it some way and make him trouble. I hope he will get his just deserts before the war is over. Because the orders came out for the end of the grog ration in July of 62. So, you could consume what was on hand. Jeffers, of course, tries to sidestep that in a very major way. Well, I have to tell you, now I got to tell you, all these pictures we're seeing are from the Mariners Museum collection. This picture is of a bottle that was found on the wreck of the Monitor, as well as this. Now, why do I want, if I'm a young man, to have Gray's hair restorative? Or why would I like to have S.T. Drake's 1860 Plantation X Bitters? Well, let me just tell you that despite not having the grog ration, sailors sought some type of relief or alcoholic relief. Sometimes they received small bottles of whiskey as gifts mailed to them. However, one of the best ways to maintain their level of chosen intoxication was to obtain spirits in other sources. Bitters were a patent medicine, and actually it contained herbs and roots, but they were preserved in the bottle by 47% ethyl alcohol, which made bitters 94 proof. Now, just think of that. Mostly if you drink bourbon, it's 80 proof. So this packs a wallop. And now, actually, this is St. Drake's, of course, as you can see from the label. But one of the most popular brands was, and Grog substitute, was Dr. Jacob Hostetler, and it was called Dr. J. Hostetler's bitters, or stomach bitters, to relief of illness. Now, actually, Dr. Jacob Hostetler is a real person from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He went to one of the first medical colleges in America, the Jefferson Medical College. His son, who also became a doctor, would sell this extract that Hostetler created in Pennsylvania. And he sold this as a positive protective against the fatal maladies of the southern swamps and the poisonous tendency of impure rivers and bayous. It claimed to be for digestive disorders, but once again, it was 94 proof. The sailors loved it, and why wouldn't those? Now, one of my favorite stories is, and Hostetler's gray restorative was everywhere. And so basically the U.S. Navy in its blockading duty, especially on the Chesapeake Bay, especially in the North Carolina Sounds, part of the Potomac flotilla's job was to guard against smuggling that happened between Southern Maryland and Virginia. There were a lot of Southern sympathizers, and there was a tremendous amount of supplies being turned. Also, the U.S. Navy instituted a very harsh review of cargo on board ships. And they wanted to stop the delivery of whiskey to other ships, as well as to other military components like the Army of the Potomac. So there just happens to be this one ship that is going to be known as the Sutler's Schooner Mail. And so on February 23rd, 1863, Lieutenant Commander Edward P. McGray of the gunboat USS Jacob Bell learned that the mail, while at Alexandria, now it came down from Georgetown, and actually it was inspected there. They didn't find any problems. It goes to Alexandria, and there it is inspected, and they find 428 dozen cans of milk drink. That was made by Nusman, Carroll, and Company of Baltimore. The cans were destined to be delivered to 3 Maine regiments serving near Belle Plaine, Virginia. Now, McCrae discovered it was villainous eggnog, and as such, he reported it all to the commander of the Potomac flotilla, a man known as Commodore Andrew A. Harwood. And then Harwood is going to advise acting master A.J. Frank of the USS Wanadank, that you will observe that the cans of the kind are not soldered in the usual way. The top and bottom are probably heated with some resinous substance, and the edges bent over in order that the cover at either end could be removed to convert the cup into a drinking cup. Harwood ordered every ship that's smuggling whiskey to be not only impounded, but to be sold at prize court, with the profits going or split. Part goes to the federal government, and if I am Lieutenant Commander McRae, I get a cut of that, and so does Harwood. So it was it's because they're called prize money. So they were on the lookout for everything that was somewhat alcoholic. This Gray's Hair Restorative, I think they tested it, and it was over 40% alcohol. So, hair restorative sounds like a good thing to have. Now, after almost 80 years of official drinking in the U.S. Navy, that practice ended with not just more than a whimper. Everyone still continued to drink. And in fact, you could see with this slide, rye whiskey known as the Monitor blend, maybe in honor of Lawrence Murray, I'm not sure, or of Wilhelm Durst. But I love it. That excellent product of the still has medicinal and tonic virtues. Oh my gosh. So that was a good excuse to try and sell those things. Great picture, a little inaccurate, but I like it nonetheless. Now, but believe it or not, the Royal Navy continued their grog ration until what was known as Black Tot Day. A tot is a cup of grog, and so it lasted. Black Tot Day is still celebrated in the 21st century. Traditions of hundreds of years simply do not fade away. Grog remains a commonplace in our language, with sayings like mind your P's and Q's, pints and quarts, pints of liquor, quarts of water in mixing the grog, or British sailors being called limeys because of the lime in their grog. You see, at first they wanted to use lemons, but lemons became very difficult to obtain during the Napoleonic Wars, but limes were not, and so the British sailors would be called limeys in honor of the limes in their grog. The thoughts of Grog still remain in dreaming about life at sea during the days of life before the mast. And so that's my little story about Grog today. There's tons more to talk about. This is a fabulous story. And so I think it is amazing. I have more than these stories in my book called The Monitor Boys, and because it was kind of wheeling. I have a blog that's available on the Mariners Museum website, which is Vice Admiral Sir Edward Old Grog Vernon's Captain's Order number 349. 2 ounces dark rum, 4 ounces hot water, suggested additions, 1 teaspoon brown sugar, a ½ ounce of fresh lime juice. And actually, by 1795, a Royal Navy doctor, Thomas Trotter, understood that this citrus juice was a cure for scurvy and approved the addition of lime juice as a necessity. He also thought putting a cinnamon stick in the grog made it even better. I hope that this evening, that as you think about grog, that you'll use the recipe and have yourself a little tot of grog. So if you have any questions or comments, I'm happy to deal with them with you. I have to tell you that Jeffers goes everywhere. And I have to say that next week, I have 2 programs, one with the noted maritime novelist, Robert Maycomber, which will be at 7 o'clock on Thursday night next week. And then on Friday at noon, I'll be dealing with some Hampton Roads history about the Colony Inn in Hilton Village. So whatever questions you have, fire away.
All right. Well, thanks, John. Okay, so the first question we have here is, do you know some of the major suppliers of alcohol to the Navy?
Well, they would be suppliers out of, places like Baltimore. Baltimore was a leading producer of rye whiskey, Pennsylvania, New York, because all the grain fields or rye fields, that's how they made that whiskey. Bourbon was not really a rage at that time, and also not on the coast where the Navy would get their supply. So according to Worden, they actually created a distillery in San Francisco at the naval station there. This is during the Mexican War, where they distill their rye whiskey. So he would get great vats of it and then deliver it to where? The crew members of all the ships in the squadron. So there's not, I mean, I could research exactly. I've never seen it referenced in the official records where they got their whiskey, but nevertheless, it was prevalent and there were so many sources for it.
Excellent. Okay, so another question here is, on a vessel like the USS Monitor, people in space were important and limited. What were the tasks of Assistant Paymaster Keeler? Was he commissioned? Was he enlisted? Supplemental crew?
Okay, no, a paymaster was a new position that was created from the position called purser, which was of an earlier era, 18th, 19th century. The paymaster had to manage all the ship's accounts. It had to pay everyone on board the ship. So he was in charge of all the money. He usually had a clerk, and his clerk, Keeler's clerk, was named Hubbard, and he also had an assistant. All he refers to that person as his contraband. So he was to maintain the food records, the pay records, the acquisition of more supplies, particularly fresh vegetables. He also had to write reports. And so he was, and if you look at other paymasters, they are some of the most literate people on board these ships, whether the Monitor or others. And I've ran across many in studying various ironclads. And so you needed to have a business background. You needed to be able to not just speak well, but write well. And and that was to be literate back then was a real, it's a benefit. Keeler, having a job of paymaster was great. And it was equivalent. The assistant paymaster was equivalent to the rank of a lieutenant. Okay, so you were considered an officer, but you're a little different than an officer because you weren't a line officer expected to serve, when the battle's happening. Although Keeler and others tried to play an active role whenever a ship went into action. Keeler actually had a watch company before the war. He had actually sailed to California during the gold rush. He had actually sailed to China and then came back, married the daughter of the head of the Yale Law School, who later became governor of Connecticut. So to get a job like a paymaster, and Keeler is 40 years old when he joins the Navy. And to get this plum position, not just as a paymaster, but also on board the Monitor. Because let me tell you, the Monitor was a tourist attraction as soon as it hit the water, even while it was building, because it was the strangest craft a man's eyes ever laid upon. As one person said, if I believed in idolatry, I'd take it out and worship it. So you're pretty well sure that the paymaster's job was multifaceted. Keeler serves as a runner during the battle with the CSS Virginia, because the speaking tube between the turret and the pilot house doesn't work. And so Keeler's got to run through the ship along with another man known as Daniel Toffee, the captain's clerk, and they deliver messages up into the turret, which is one of the reasons why the Monitor had bad fire control. So I have to say that the paymaster was an excellent position. It was well paid. You had to have several skills. And to become a paymaster was a plum position to have with the pay of a regular lieutenant. Okay.
Excellent. Yeah, I would imagine you have to be pretty pretty on it to keep track of all the books and such.
Oh, without a doubt. Otherwise, you'd be court-martialed. But what I really think is great is that, their writing skills. And you can go to ships like the USS Florida, the USS Montauk, and their paymasters write letters home, write diaries, and that are the paymaster of the Rhode Island writes about the sinking of the Monitor. And so, that they are, and when you read Keeler, and I would suggest, I quoted Keeler a lot in my book, The Monitor Boys, but Robert Daly, a former professor at United States Naval Academy, actually edited Keeler's letters that were in the museum there, and it's excellent reading. It's a rare book. It's not in print today, but you can find copies. A little pricey, but I have mine, so I'm happy.
I had one question. We have a couple more in the queue here, but my question was laudanum a thing at this point in history?
Oh, yes. Laudanum was loads of fun for some. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, of course, wrote his greatest poems, Kubla Khan, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, Christabel, having laudanum. My favorite guy drinking laudanum during the Civil War is John Bankhead Magruder, and he mixed his laudanum to soothe his nerves with brandy. So you can well imagine him riding around, this, always at a gallop. He was always impeccably dressed. He talked with a lisp incessantly. So the bottom line is, yes, laudanum is a medicine. And it is a medicine that is commonplace in the 18th and 19th century. As soon as trade with India is open, that's where, back then India included Pakistan and Bangladesh. Pakistan especially is where much opium is grown. And so they, of course, made it into a medicine because of its pain relief. Coleridge suffered from a serious arthritic condition. And so, when he wrote about how he did Kubla Khan, he took some laudanum, lay down, woke up, and he was just hitting it with this poem, 55 lines that are some of the most beautiful. And the next, do did Kubla Khan a pleasure dome decree. Yeah, I could go on. But the bottom line is that someone came to his door and broke his concentration. He couldn't write any more of it. But laudanum was good for him. He wrote such lines like, alone, alone, all alone, alone on a sunless sea, as never a saint took pity on the soul in agony. So that's enough of Coleridge. But yes, laudanum was commonplace.
Okay. Yeah, I know.
Got me started there, Tim.
Right. I know it had some legitimate medical uses, but it was also heavily abused.
What are you going to do?
What are you going to do? Right. All right. So we've got a couple more questions right now. I thought this was a good one. When did the British Navy stop its daily grog ration?
1970.
Wow.
And they did so in part, and this is the pomp and circumstance of how they delivered it. And they did so, not so much they didn't want their crew members to drink, it's that they were working with heavy machinery and, accidents. If you have 2 gills of whiskey or rum or gin, no matter what you cut it with, that's going to hurt you. And so I would have to say that it was, just commonplace. Well, they actually serve beer on ships today, limited amounts in messes on aircraft carriers and other ships. Because it's a solution when you're not on duty or you just come off duty. They have mass cafeterias on board aircraft carriers. Remember, they have almost 5,000 men, so you can just imagine how they get fed. And so that's an option for them. I think it's controlled, but nevertheless, it's there. And actually, Grog, it was William Penn who, when he captured Jamaica during the first Anglo-Dutch Naval War, and I'll give you a test about that at the end of the program, actually, instead of using beer or wine to cut the water, he used rum that he thought was better. Alcohol, they didn't even know it, but it, cleaned the bad things in your mouth and so forth.
Excellent. Yeah, my dad, he served on the Nimitz in the 80s, and it was a big deal. They were out in the middle of the ocean for like a really long time, so they airlifted beer into them. And it was like the first time in decades that they actually served alcohol on a naval vessel, like a U.S. Navy vessel. I remember it was in the newspaper and everything.
That's all about what's called the doldrums. And, you're on a ship, you're on a ship, you're on a ship, you're on a ship at the sea, and you don't see land. And, although you have all these duties to perform, when you're off duty, what do you do? And
certainly
a couple of beers work for some. I prefer martinis myself, but
yeah, I like Manhattans myself.
I know that, which is probably the closer drink to American grog.
Yeah. Okay, so we got one last question here. So it said no mention of the Confederate Navy. Were there any special alcohol rules in the Confederate Navy?
They followed the grog ration and did not eliminate it. You have to realize that the head of the Navy Department used to be Senator Stephen Russell Mallory. He was on the Committee for the Conduct of Naval Affairs. All these officers came from the old Navy and joined the Confederate Navy. So all those traditions you had on board a naval ship, you brought with you when you served on Confederate ships. There are a couple of teetotalers. There are other ones like Victor Randolph, Victor Randolph was too fond of his drink, according to Franklin Buchanan. Buchanan has all sorts of complaints about Victor Randolph, but that's another story for another time. I may do a program about Victor Randolph. See, some of the people that joined the Confederate Navy were what's called superannuated. In other words, they were in their 70s, still in the Navy, and they had formed some bad habits. And it's hard to believe that they, just brought them with them. And then all of a sudden, Mallory realized that these people, just don't have the energy anymore to be an active commander of a ship or so forth. And so he creates that class acting. That's not the regular Navy. That's a temporary acting position. So the Keeler was acting assistant paymaster. So you have to realize Matthew Galbraith Perry, the hero of the Mexican War, the founder of the American Steam Navy, the man that opened Japan to American commerce. You know what he died of? Cirrhosis of the liver. Okay, so there you have it. They did like to drink, and it was a big tradition, but the temperance movement was so great, especially in the North, that won out in the U.S. Navy. Okay. If there are not any other questions, I want to thank you all so much for being with us today. I just want you to remember always to mind your P's and Q's. I want you also, hope you'll tune in Thursday night at 7 for my program with Robert Maycomber. And we were actually just going to talk about naval events during the Civil War in Florida and the Gulf and the Caribbean Sea, which is fascinating. You have the Trent Affair and other events. Then on Friday, this area where Tim and I live, Hampton Roads, and the Mariners is here, Mariners Museum, is noted for its tourism. And basically the Colony Inn was a 5-star hotel. And so was the Chamberlain on Fort Monroe. You know, when they opened Colonial Williamsburg, there was no Williamsburg Inn. So to get to the Chamberlain and to the Colony Inn, if you wanted to go to Yorktown when they celebrated in 1931, the anniversary of the battle, there was a concrete road, and the hotels would note situated on a concrete road, just to let everyone know they didn't have to go through bumps and mud and so forth. So yeah, it was it's a great story, and that will be at noon next week, a part of my Hampton Roads series. So anyway, thank you all for participating today. I really appreciate it. We here at the Mariners Museum love to share our content, really like to engage people because the knowledge, our artifacts, noticed I use, you know, all those pictures are from the Mariners Museum collection. The objects that we saw from the Mariners Museum collection, those are actual bottles from the wreck of the Monitor. So we know that they were drinking this bitters. And so, and you can, when we reopen, you can come and see them. But until then, I thank you very much. Remember, my name is John Vernon Corstein in honor of old Grog. I don't know for sure, but I'm going to say so today. And so thank you all so much. Okay. So you all take care and have a groggy, as they would say, afternoon. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everybody.